Metro Awakening is a game that had a lot riding on it for me. I'm a big Metro fan. It's been a couple of years since I completed Last Light 2033 and Exodus, but I love those games. I really enjoyed them, and translating that from the flat screen to VR is nothing short of a difficult task. That's why I was a little worried about Awakening, not because any of the trailers really put me off, just because it's such a beloved franchise that they had to do justice. So it makes me happy now that I can sit back, I can relax, I can exhale, and I can say, Metro Awakening is really good. Before we really sink our teeth into this, just a couple of things. The first one is only 25% you are subscribed, and since saying this to you guys and asking to sub, I actually saw a metric change of this, which is crazy. So if you'd like to sub, please feel free to do so. Also, regarding spoilers, in this video, there will be spoilers about locations, enemies, and weapons. However, it will be limited to just that, and if you don't want to get spoiled on any of that, I will give you a fair warning and timestamp so you can skip past it. Anyway, let's jump straight into what I think about this game, which is a lot of positive and not really much negative. Metro Awakening puts you in the shoes of Khan, a character from the original games, as you experience his story and how he became the character that we see in the later games, as this is a prequel to the original set in 2028, while the others are 2033 and onwards. Khan's story follows him as he chases a particular somebody who he needs to find around the metro, and uncovers a pretty horrendous mystery. This story kept me engaged all the way through the game, and I really enjoyed unraveling its mysteries, trying to figure out what each of the visions and plot points actually meant, and by the end everything tied together nicely. As a Metro fan, this felt a lot more spiritual than some of the other games, as 2033 and Last Light both have very philosophical questions. The spirituality is really honed in here because of the character of Khan and who he is in the Metro mythos. Overall though, really enjoyed the story. As for the PSVR2 port of the game, visually, it looks fantastic. This is built on Unreal Engine, if I remember right, and that is a very good decision. Despite it being reprojected, I never felt the reprojection was that bad, probably due to the darker tones of the game. In a game like Arizona Sunshine, I really feel reprojection because it's quite bright and you can see all those frames shifting, whereas here, it's not too bad. Resolution looks absolutely fantastic. I was blown away by so many things in terms of pure detail and fidelity throughout my playthrough of the game. And by looking at this footage, I'm not sure if there is dynamic foveated rendering because everything seems pretty clear, but it still looks great. All in all, the game looks phenomenal, and especially on the OLED panels, the dark tunnels and even the vibrant contrast of some part of the metro really come to life here and look great. To kind of put a tab on the PSVR2 features side of things as well, before we dive into the game world and mechanics a little more, in terms of features, we're looking at a full use here. We have haptics in the controllers for picking up items. One particular example of the haptics as well that really blew me away and attention to detail was when I picked up a bottle of alcohol and poured it on my hand, and I felt that kind of ripple throughout my left controller. Little details like that really showed that they cared and put in the work to little things that maybe people won't even experience in the game. And it makes me wonder how many other details people will uncover that I completely missed. You've got haptics in the head for when you receive damage, or even in certain instances during scenes where your character gets hit in the head. For example, there's one part where you're standing there and get hit in the head and knocked out. You feel that in the head haptics, and at that point I thought, wow, that's a use of the head haptics that really makes you feel more immersed into this essentially cutscene that's not really going to be present on any other platform, which is a really cool use of it. There's also adaptive triggers for all of the weapons. However, during my playthrough, I encountered one of two bugs, and this is the first one that I encountered. It really isn't anything too bad, but essentially if I picked up a weapon, it would engage the adaptive triggers, so I'd feel the trigger resistance, and sometimes, only sometimes, I would drop the weapon, it'd be gone, but the controller would keep the adaptive triggers even though there's nothing in my hands. Picking up a weapon and dropping it again then sorted this, but that's literally the only one of two bugs that I encountered in the entire game. As for the use of PSVR2 features here though, everything is on full display and everything works really well. It's a damn good PSVR2 port. Now, in terms of talking about the game more in depth, one of the biggest takeaways is this is Metro come to life in VR. I'm doing a full playthrough of the series and I cannot count even in the first episode how many times I stopped and just said, wow, it feels like I'm in the flat screen games. Especially at the start of the game, a lot of the areas feel real. There are a lot of avenues to navigate, people having conversations, and a lot to see and take in. What helps this is that there are so many objects around the world to kind of interact with and play with. For example, the first room you're put into has a piano you can play, a guitar you can play, and a lot of objects you can pick up and throw around, and this doesn't let up throughout the entire game. Things interact in terms of physics exactly how you'd expect them to, and honestly it's pretty close to Half-Life Alyx levels of immersion in terms of the physics here. In terms of getting around the metro, you have a lot of options, whether it's teleport, smooth movement, snap turning, smooth turning, all this good stuff. There are options for toggle grip, basically everything you'd expect is here, which is great. As you progress through the game, you'll be going through various different areas, and these aren't the most varied. I think if you're not a Metro fan coming into this, don't expect a load of variation in the amount of areas that you're going to be seeing. After all, this is a series that's based underground, so you'll be going through a lot of tunnels, utilitarian-looking rooms, and apocalyptic settlements. All of these do look pretty damn great, although I did have a couple of issues with pop-in, probably only twice throughout the game, and the game will last you about 6 hours in terms of runtime. But I only had these pop-in issues, once or twice, and really it was just like a character or an object popping in the distance that was only slightly noticeable. That is the second bug that I encountered in the game, and that's literally it. I am going to spoil one thing location-wise now, so if you don't want to hear that, skip forward to the timestamp on screen right now. Okay, now that everyone else has moved on, something I brought up a lot when seeing the marketing for this game was that I hoped we'd be going outside, as even though the series is called Metro and most of the action happens underground, there are quite a few set pieces in the original games that are overground that are really, really memorable. However, I'm here to tell you that there is no overground sequences in Metro Awakening, unfortunately. Whether this is a limitation of the hardware that the game is on, or for some other reason, maybe budget, I'm not too sure. You do get a glimpse of it early on in the game, but you don't actually step above the surface and onto it at any time during your playthrough. The gameplay you'll be doing is scavenging, puzzling, fighting, and stealthing around. There is dialogue to be had here, but most of it is just spoken for you. It is fairly dialogue heavy in a lot of sequences, so there's no choices or anything like that. But most of the time, you will be engaging in gunfights, attacking enemies in other ways like melee, stealthing around them, or solving fairly simple puzzles. They're really not too challenging, as puzzles aren't really the main focus of the game. They just kind of increase immersion as you come across an obstacle and then have to solve something small to get through it. The stealth is pretty decent, as you've got the same light indicator as in the flat screen game, so if you're hiding in the shadows, it'll show that you're hidden. If you're out in the open, it'll show that you're visible, and enemies will see you pretty easily. You've got a variety of weapons to be used as well, offering you some stealthy and quiet options, or offering you some loud options if you prefer to blast your way through. The same system from the flat screen games of managing ammo, filters, and medicine is also here, which is great to see. During firefights, you'll be picking up enemy weapons, taking out the mags, and adding it to your own ammo pool, and I think that's just a fantastic feature that really gets you immersed into the scavenging feel of life in the Metro. The filter system is also pretty much a one-to-one replica of the flat screen games. You have a gas mask which has filters on the front. Each filter will give you 3 minutes of gas mask time in these radiation zones that you come across. Once the filter runs out, you start taking damage until you find a new one and replace it, or you replace it with one that you've already stored in your backpack, which adds a bit of tension to some areas because you know you're gonna have to take a break from the combat to replace your filter and then get back to it. Weapon variety is pretty decent as well, as they're introduced to you throughout regular intervals throughout the game. And there will be multiple times where you'll be introduced to a weapon. For example, you can take a detour in a certain area and find one of the new weapons nicely displayed for you with some ammo, but if you went past that and missed it, it then crops up another time in the future for you to pick up again. It's clever design like this that leads you to finding weapons in a natural feeling way. I was worried that the weapons would feel a little bit too similar to Arizona Sunshine or After the Fall as well, which isn't really a bad thing on its own, but I just kind of wanted them to have their own sort of identity, and luckily they do. All of them feel very different in terms of the handling, the reloading, the sounds. The team who did the weapons here have done a great job. And little features like being able to half load your pistol magazine to see how many rounds you've got is just genius, and I'm so glad that all this attention to detail has been put on all the firearms in the game. Enemies as well are pretty fun to fight. Some of the AI is pretty good, and some of the enemies are genuinely terrifying, especially when it gets really dark. One of my biggest criticisms of Vertigo Games' previous games, like Arizona Sunshine 1 and 2, have been that there isn't that much enemy variety. This is alleviated in Metro Awakening, as there are a fair few enemies to fight. Not as many as the flat screen games, but a lot more than the regular zombies in Arizona. Once again here, I'm going to talk about weapons and enemies more in depth, but once again, I'm going to have to spoil what you encounter, so please feel free to skip to the time code if you're worried about that. Okay, now that everyone's skipped ahead again, the enemy situation is essentially you encounter two types of humans, which have different weapon selections and dialogue, and they do act fairly differently as well. One is quite quick and they run around, and the others are fairly beefy and bulky and will fire back at you with conventional weapons. You'll also encounter large and small Nosalis. You'll find some spiders as well, which are absolutely terrifying. And lastly, there's another enemy type that just require you to avoid them by not getting too close. I don't really want to spoil what those are because those are more story related spoilers, but they do exist as another enemy type. Overall, a fairly varied roster, But coming from the flat screen games, I may have expected a little more. However, this is confined to the metro at all times, whereas the flat screen games goes above ground a fair bit, meaning that you'll encounter the enemies like the flying types and the big gorillas, which you do in 2033 and Last Light, which is not really possible here because of the setting. Okay, now that we talked about those enemies, the weapons you'll have been seeing on screen right now, again, there's a fair bit of variety here, but it's not going to be as varied as Arizona that's set in America. This is set in Russia, and also in an apocalypse where most of the resources have been used up, so you're not going to have a massive selection. The weapon designs, though, are exactly the same as the flat screen games, and it feels so good to be holding these as accurate as they are and going around the metro with them, blasting enemies away. The sense of horror of the metro is also encapsulated really well throughout the narrative and the presentation. Whether it's encountering horrendous cults, character dialogue feeling hopeless and depressed in the situation that they're in, or physically being engulfed in darkness as you traverse through the metro's gloomy tunnels, Awakening does a stellar job of making you feel on edge, scared, and tense. The tone is on point throughout, and that feeling of dread doesn't let up for a second. Voice acting for the most part as well is pretty damn good. Combined with some competent writing, it leads to some moments where the performances are actually absolutely stellar. There are some moments where it feels a little bit overblown with certain characters, but Khan especially, by the end, the performance allowed me to feel like I knew the character quite well, combined with the dialogue too. Penultimately here, I want to talk about just the immersive features with the backpack and other things like that. Your backpack system is incredible. It's something that's been brought over from the flat again. For example, in the flat screen games, you take out your backpack and everything's kind of stored on there, your map, your items, and it's the same here. You take your backpack off and there you go. You have your filters for your gas mask, you have your lighter, you have all of your weapons, you have your grenades, and you have your charger as well. It's all conveniently placed on there in a backpack system that makes sense for the world. That charger as well is used to charge things around the map to help you progress, and that is identical to the flat screen game as well. And it means you also have to charge up your flashlight when it runs out, and that can really lead to some tense situations where you're fighting off enemies in the dark and your flashlight dies and you have to charge it quickly, and it's very, very stressful and so immersive. The lighter from the flat screen games also returns, meaning you can burn your way through spider webs, which is another really immersive factor that I loved. And the gas mask is also such a cool addition, especially since it fogs up and sweats like the flat screen game does, and then you have to physically wipe it to get it clean, which is just such a cool addition. The sections from the flat screen games where you're sat on a cart going from station to station on the rail system are also here as well, and act as small wave shooter segments from location to location. There are a fair few of these, but they vary up which enemies you're fighting, whether it's humans or Nazalis, and you get to use a big gun on the front or back, which is very cool. Finally, the music as well is just so good. A couple of the tracks really stand out here, especially during the beginning and the ending of the game, but it's one of the ones where I really hope it gets released on streaming platforms because I love to listen to it in my own time, which I think is a compliment within itself. Okay, that was a long review, but I had a lot to say about this game. I've really enjoyed my time with it. As a big Metro fan, and somebody who was going into this skeptical, to be honest, because I didn't want to get my feelings hurt, I'm very glad that I came out the other side with a positive outlook, having really enjoyed the 6-hour experience. Thank you all for watching. Are you going to be picking it up? Please do let me know. Thank you to our patrons and YouTube members. Without them, none of this would be possible. That is Luke Bentley, Phil Irving, Hazit Mirza, Ace Gamer, Hippie Pickle, Jin 007, A License to Chill, Sun WTF, Fat Controllers, The Game Cat, Andrew Aaronwright, Jason Parker, Lamar Hall, Jordy Bansmer, Lemon 64K, Outcast VR, Property 777, Gundy, Salvador, David Gephardt, Lauren Thole, Spencer Drake, Majo X3, The Real Estate Procrastinator, Game Cat, and Ninja Agent. If you want to join the Patreon or YouTube membership, all those links are down below, and I hope to see you all in the next one.